Hi, welcome to Black, Queer, and Trans Excellence. My name is Marisa Rosa Grant, and I am your host today. For this week, I am interviewing quite a few sweet, amazing people in our community. The first I have here is the Black Gay Men's Network of Ontario. It is centralized hub for same-gender loving men of African diaspora, Afro-Latino, Caribbean, Black identities, operating from Toronto as an intergenerational and mentorship opportunities, leadership, self-development, empowerment, as well as activism support aimed at improving the lives of Black queer people in Ontario. I have the lovely opportunity today to speak with singer and songwriter Robert Ball, and he is here as a representative of the Black Gay Men's Network. Hi,
Hi.
Robert. Nice to virtually meet you. So I just have some questions today about the community organization that you work with, and what does that organization do?
Well, the organization was birthed out of a number of conversations and gatherings of the Black gay community that were put on by different organizations. And we discussed a number of things affecting the Black gay and queer community, but the singular thing was the rise of HIV continually among the Black queer community. And so we talked about why that is. And we started to talk about some of the different things. So culture being one of them, connectivity, mentorship, substance use, sexual health, and sexual pleasure, and how it's not just a singular thing, but it's all of those things. So our network is trying to speak to all of those things, speak to building community, speak to mentoring people, speak to representation, and hopefully seeing those things then decrease.
Amazing. So how long has this organization been around for?
Ooh. Well, we've been in the work. The dialogue started, I participated in the first dialogue. My first dialogue was 2018. There was one previously in 2010. The network was founded out of the 2018 dialogue. We had our launch last summer, 2019. And so we've officially been the BGMN, Black Gay Men's Network, since 2019.
Amazing. That representation is so important, so needed. So, with everything that's going on in the world right now, can you explain how your organization has been affected by racism or how Black queer organizations might be treated differently, especially now?
Well, kind of what I was saying before is that the whole reason that the organization and the network was formed is because we realized that there were holes, that there were gaps. And we now, on a very global scale, are talking about systemic racism. And that was the key, is that systems are in place that then affect healthcare, that then affect housing, that then affect mental health, that affect employment, that affect representation. And so the whole premise of the organization is based on the fact that systemic racism and racism does exist.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, further to that question, how or has the current political climate affected this work at all?
Oh, well, I think it's affected us all as Black folks. It's an emotional time. It's a traumatic time. And I think for a lot of people it's an awakening, but for most of us it's lived experience. So it's finally the world is waking up to see that what we've been talking about. It's the aha, as Oprah
Mhm.
likes to say, for a lot of people. And I've been in situations where people are talking about um, the trauma of Black folks and how people positively, but talking about how this is unfair for Black folks to continue to have to open up their trauma. But at the same time, it's a healing. It's like therapy. It's like finally talking. It's finally have the opportunity to be seen and to be heard and to share stories. And it doesn't mean that it's not traumatic, but it certainly affected all of us. Where it's affected our programming is, of course, more significantly addressing it. And we've changed. So we had a panel on COVID-19 and the effect in the Black community and the Black gay community. And it was the week after George Floyd's death. So of course we wanted to address how people are dealing and coping with that, especially now that you're in a pandemic and dealing with other potentially mental health issues. Um, and so, yeah, it's affected us all.
So right now, is the organization in need of anything? Any resources that people could
Well,
potentially provide?
yeah, it is a volunteer organization, so volunteers, but with any volunteer organization, to maintain sustainability is funding. And so to have continued long-term funding is certainly something. But also in being a hub, we want to make sure that we are connected not just to organizations, but to actual businesses, entrepreneurs, other networks, other community activities, so that we can really help to facilitate connectivity with our community and build bridges and create opportunities for people.
So what would be the best way to contact or to reach out if you have resources? Like if someone's watching right now and they know that their company has resources that they'd love to provide and support in that way, what would be the best way for them to get a hold?
The best way is bgmnontario@gmail.com. That's the email, but the website is bgmn.ca. Our social media is BGMN Ontario. Try to keep the branding consistent. So you can look us up in those places and email us, send us a message. We've got some great support from places like Band Gallery. OHTN has been supporting us, Black Cap, GMSH, ACHO. But the more community networks and resources that we have, the better for our community.
Amazing. I really hope people can help to support because there's so many like hubs like this that exist, but they never get enough support.
Hmm.
So, wondering now, like what positive effects have you seen come out of your organization? Like what sort of changes have you seen since the creation of this organization?
Well, it started right at the beginning, actually. During our launch, we had a launch at Band Gallery, and we had a diverse panel from our community. Philip Pike, who's a filmmaker. We had Twisted, who's part of the ballroom community. We had Junior, who historically was part of an organization similar to BGMN in the 80s and 90s called Aya, which was fighting for Black queer voices in the 80s and the 90s. Um, we also had, who else did we have? We had Olu, who is an artist who I know that you all had on the other day. And the event was a success. We ended up going a lot longer than it planned. They had to kick us out because it was just so refreshing that people had an opportunity and a space to talk, for Black men to talk, to share
Mhm.
experiences, to be vulnerable, to be intimate, to disagree, to agree, to realize that we have different points of view. We don't all come from a singular experience. Um, and that immediately told us and reaffirmed how important this is that we do that. When I think about the intersections of being a Black man in the Americas, and then you compound that to being a Black gay man, we know the stats on Black men. Some we don't know. We know about incarceration. Um, we know about police violence, obviously, but we don't always talk about mental health, and suicide is high among Black men. We don't talk about how Black men tend to be less educated and therefore less employed than Black women. And then you compound being gay, we know that Black queer communities tend to be more homeless, more disenfranchised. The HIV/AIDS rate is high. And so to have spaces where people can talk and to have outlets, we've immediately seen, and our Facebook and our social media has immediately started to thrive and had a lot more engagement.
That's amazing. I'm so happy to hear that it's still growing and still like that energy is still flowing through that organization.
Yeah, and it's just the beginning, so hopefully more to
Yeah,
come.
that's amazing. So with this organization, are there long-term goals? Like where do you see this or what goals will you have for the next 3, 5, 10 years from now?
Right.
What do you hope to see or how do you hope to see this grow?
Well, we would love to see long-term sustainability, which which of course funding is part of that, and awareness of the network, connectivity to the community, being rooted in the community. So volunteers, hopefully permanent staff, but then also, as I said before, collaboration with other organizations, so that, like I said, we're ingrained in the community. And then to our basic, how we were formed was health outcomes, right? And so if we build this community, if we have access, if we have representation, then hopefully we start to see um, lowered rates of HIV. We start to see greater housing, greater representation. We start to see all of that start to unfold. So those are like the short-term and long-term expectations, hopes, goals.
So you talked about collaborating with other groups. Are there groups that you have collaborated with, or any that pique interest at collaborating with you right now?
Yeah, Band Gallery, like I said, has been a really great resource. There's also, and forgive me, I'm forgetting the name, but there was an exhibit that happened at Band Gallery, and it was curated by Courtney, and it was talking about the Black, gay, and queer history in Toronto and Ontario in particular. And so we're supporting them, and there's communication there. I know that I've done work with NIA Center, and so we've talked about potentially doing some collaboration there. But like I said, we're looking for more. So if you're out there and you're watching, if you know anybody, especially in the Black community, where there might not be a representation of a Black queer voice, and we can go in and hopefully be that representation or create outlets and resources for those people.
Amazing. I know we touched on it, but why is there, for the people who don't understand, why is there such a need for an organization like this? Like, it's clear to me, but
Right.
for everyone else, like, why is there a need for this?
Well, kind of to like what I was saying before, not kind of, but exactly to what I was saying before about the need for community, the need for representation, the need for access. And yes, it boils down, like I said, to some of these health outcomes, but they're the symptom, not the cause,
Mm,
right? And so to me, the proof is in the pudding. When you look at these symptoms, and now finally the world is waking up to some of these symptoms and how we are affected in day-to-day ways, that's the reason that we're the need. So we can start to be the middle gap between the symptom and the cause.
amazing. So there's tons of different like mentorship and meetings that you have. What does the mentorship look like when you're doing it in this organization?
That part we're still developing, to
Mhm.
be honest. What we've been doing is highlighting people in the community, so profiles, and diversely. So we've had profile people in the healthcare industry, people in the entertainment industry. So again, there's representation, and we've also let people know that they can reach out to these people and say, "Hey," because sometimes you don't know. Representation is everything. You don't know that you have an opportunity to do something or to be somebody or to connect in a certain way if you've never seen anybody who looks like you or of your experience. So that's the first step. But we want to get into actual spaces, but unfortunately we're locked down, so we can't do that. So that part's a little bit on hold. But to get into actual spaces where we can have some of that. Our initial panel, like I talked about, we had a spectrum of more seasoned people, I like to call it, more mature folks, and some of the up and coming folks. And so that also speaks to mentoring as well.
Awesome. And as I like review your like areas of focus, it really goes into depth about what this is, what's needed. Like the whole sexual health and pleasure is such a thing that isn't really talked about in Black communities as a whole. So to have this, and it's like the Black queer community is so important because there's so much lack of information, lack of knowledge. Like, is there any pieces that you'd like to leave us with, like in terms of, because a lot of people don't know much about sexual health and pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we know that in our communities, there's a lot of stigma. Canada's racial dynamic is a little bit different than the U.S., then South America, then the Caribbean, and that we have a melting pot of the African diaspora and of the Black diaspora. And so therefore people come with different cultural nuances and ideas. And so we've talked about getting connected to some of those organizations that speak to and deal with first comers. Um, but that is a really big point because a lot of times in terms of Black gay men, it's always just the health part of sex and not the pleasure part of
Mhm.
sex. And so we just actually had a panel with Malcolm Lovejoy, who is in the sex work industry, and we were talking about that, about sexual pleasure. And you're right, in Black communities, it's something that we don't typically talk about, and it's stigmatized in terms of, and not just in the queer communities, but in our communities in general. Our sexual health and well-being and pleasure and desires are just not talked about. It's taboo. So in having conversations, and he spoke so eloquently and so beautifully. It's still up on our page, and it will be up on our YouTube as well. So if people want to check that out on the BGM, oh, we're also on YouTube, BGMN Ontario on YouTube, and you can check out his his points and his stances, which are, he was really eloquent. But yeah, conversations and talking about it really, I think, will start to bring down some of those stigmas.
Beautiful. And there's also a part where it's very connected to the culture. So I heard that you touched on like ballroom culture. So is this organization that also like supports those, or you create different like events around like ballroom and doing things within the arts?
Yeah, absolutely. We our goal is to support everything that's already existing, but also to be a hub, so people can let us know what they're doing, which has been really great about our social media, Facebook, anyways, that people are letting now finally have a place to say, hey, look what I'm doing this, whether it be the individuals or events or networks, or look at this press release, or look at what's happening over here in this community. So we definitely support ballroom and other events that are happening, exhibits. But then our intention, like I said, we've been stuck to programming online right now, but our intention is also to host in-person events to build that community and those networks. So there will potentially be ballroom events, there will be concerts, there will be workshops and symposiums, there will be networking events, hopefully sports events, all of the above, to speak to the depth of people's interests in our community.
Awesome. Like this is so great that this exists, and like the opportunities to just remove that stigma around so many topics, like against substance abuse, against like removing stigma against sexual health,
Mhm.
and tying back into the culture and understanding that a lot of these things or these ideas of like where the stigma comes from is deep within our roots and what we've learned growing up. Um, is there, would you like to touch on how you felt about being part of this organization, like why it resonates with you, what inspired you to kind of be part of this movement?
Well, I was fortunate to be asked to be part of the initial dialogues. I've traveled for 12 to 15 years. I was based in New York for many years. And so in coming back, some of the people that I have known here for many years knew that I had participated in some Pride performances. I had been connected to an organization in New York called Moby Talks, Mobilizing Our Brothers Initiative, which is very much like what we're doing. Um, and Native Son Now as well, which is another great one based out of New York, but uh, the US. And so I was fortunate to just take part in those conversations. Just that alone was great. Um, and then when it came time to like, okay, so what's the action? I actually remember putting up my hand and saying, well, I'm a person of action. and and so I just dove in. It wasn't really a thought. It was just, I've always been that person. Even in high school, I was part of every school committee. Um, I'm currently in Stratford, Ontario. This would have been my first Stratford season in the festival. Um, and I participated in a panel talking about systemic racism in the arts and in theater specifically, but and then also in this institution. And people have been talking about how brave it is to do that, but really it wasn't an initial thought. It was just an action, a call to action. And yeah, that's for me anyway.
Mhm. So in your process of like learning more about yourself, were these different pieces that have come into this organization things that you would have needed support with at that time?
Absolutely. When I think about and the inception of this organization, but even what's happening globally right now over the last couple weeks, but even in the last couple years, how life would have looked and how different I potentially would have been, or how my evolution would have come along sooner, or what it would have looked like had these things existed. It would have been drastically different, and I'm happy for who I am now and where I am now. Certainly, the life experience I've had has brought me to this point. But yeah, absolutely. To have a space, to have some kind of representation and community and acknowledgement, I think it'll save people, and it certainly would have not, if not just literally physically their lives, but their mental health and their well being, their sense of self, and it would have done that for me as well.
Awesome. I hope more people, like once outside opens officially, I guess you'll have more of these in-person meetings. I feel like there'll be a bigger, like once things start to open up, I feel like there'll be a bigger attendance for a lot of things because we're going to need so much more support and so much more conversations. Um, I also read that there's a lot of opportunities that is created through this organization, like opportunities for people to learn from experiences and activism from past generations, I guess in terms of like mentorship. Um, did you have any mentors that had helped you come into your identity,
Uh,
or you wish you had some?
I wish I had some, and I did. We can have a longer conversation about this maybe another time, but I definitely did. I had